Hello, I've come live today to talk about our female hormone testing. Here at Embracing Nutrition, the test that we typically prefer to work with from a hormonal testing point of view is the Dutch test. Now, Dutch stands for Dried Urine Testing of Comprehensive Hormones. It's a deep dive into your sex hormones, your stress hormones, and some of the influencing factors over those hormones. Now, we do a Dutch test for both women and men, but the one I'm going to share with you today is our female hormone panel. They're very similar, with just a slight variation in the androgen reporting for men, which differs slightly to our female report. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick off by sharing a report. So what I've got today is just a sample report on the screen for you today. So I generally start with clients by digging into their sex hormones. Now, why would you want to consider Dutch testing? Okay, so honestly, if you're a woman of a hormonal age, then a Dutch test is a pretty good option for you. If you're struggling with regularity of your menstrual cycle, if you're struggling with premenstrual symptoms like PMS, breast tenderness, if you're struggling with fertility or you're trying to get pregnant and you don't know what's happening with your hormones, if you are perimenopausal, certainly if you've had or are at risk of a hormone-dependent cancer, these are all potential reasons why we would recommend a Dutch test. A teenage girl that's really struggling with heavy, painful periods, somebody with a diagnosis of polycystic ovarian syndrome. Realistically, anybody with a hormonal imbalance, this is the test for you. So if you were to go to the doctors and ask to have your estrogen levels tested, well, generally, you might not be able to get them tested just because it is not seen as an essential marker on the NHS. But if you were lucky enough to get them tested, what you would have tested is your estradiol. Now, estradiol is one part of three. We've got three different elements to our estrogen: estrone, estradiol, and estriol, also known as E1, E2, and E3. Now, what's important to know is what's the combination of those estrogens. So can you understand just getting a snapshot from the GP is not going to give you a full picture. Now, probably even more importantly than that is, what do you do with those estrogens? And we can push them down three main pathways: the green, the red, and the blue, making 2-hydroxyestrone, 4-hydroxyestrone, and 16-alpha-hydroxy. Now, of these three pathways, the more aggressive pathways are this one here and this one here. Now, you can see these little letter and number coding here. These are our genetic ability to push our estrogen down those pathways. When I'm referring here to genetics, it's part of our makeup. So some of us were born with a higher propensity to push more estrogen down this more aggressive estrogen here. And that would be because your CYP1B1 pathway is working more than somebody who didn't have a genetic variation of that. Now, there's no physical characteristic that we can look at to see whether or not you're that person. And yes, there's some health conditions that could allude to that, and breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer in a man are definitely some of those. More other estrogen dominant conditions like endometriosis and fibroids could again allude to it. But looking at you, I can't look at characteristics. And this is what's potentially dangerous about estrogen. We don't know how much of that more aggressive pathway you're carrying. Now, if I take you over to this pie chart on the right-hand side, This takes you through the percentage of your estrogen that you're shuttling down those pathways. And you can see here what the expected ranges are, and then we can compare it to the percentage that you personally are pushing down that pathway. Now, we don't need to panic if we were to find that your more aggressive pathways were upregulated, then we can certainly work to block these pathways and encourage the shuttling down the safer of the pathways. Now, this test, the Dutch test, isn't actually testing your genetics. We also offer that here at Embracing Nutrition, and often we encourage both simultaneously. However, there's an element of estimated guesswork can go on from this report, even with the absence of those genomics, i.e., if you've got a big percentage going down this pathway, it's odds on favorite that you have got an upregulation of this pathway here. And one of the reasons that I certainly would be encouraging this test as somebody is if they've got a family history of cancer and we're trying to work on prevention by understanding what's going on for your specific genetic pathways. So understanding those top 3 estrogens, E1, E2, and E3, and understanding where you're shuttling that estrogen, 2-hydroxy, 4-hydroxy, and 16-alpha-hydroxy is a huge part of our estrogen picture. Now, if we pop back up to the top and we're looking at your progesterone, and what's important in us women is the relative ratio between estrogen and progesterone. Now, typically in our younger years, we have a more affluent supply of progesterone. A big function of progesterone is to keep us pregnant in that first 10 to 12 weeks of pregnancy before the placenta takes over. So in theory, when our body is past its prime of fertility, that progesterone starts to drop. However, there's other reasons apart from aging that can encourage that progesterone to drop. And one of those is our stress response. Now, you can see here that progesterone comes from a precursor, and that precursor is called pregnenolone. And we could actually go one step ahead of pregnenolone, and that is to cholesterol. Now, we make cholesterol within our body. Sadly, it gets a bit of a bad press. Excuse my poor writing on my mouse pad. So it gets a bit of a bad press. Cholesterol's bad. Cholesterol isn't bad. Sometimes too much of it can be problematic. So cholesterol makes pregnenolone, and pregnenolone has 3 fates: making progesterone, making DHEA, that then goes on in us women to help to support our more male pattern hormones, our androgens. And the third pathway, which is covered on the next page, is making cortisol, our stress hormone. So if you've got a long-standing history of stress, the modern world that we're living in today is very predominating towards stress, then what can happen is all of our pregnenolone gets stolen to making cortisol. And therefore, this pathway here, progesterone, gets shut down. Similarly, this pathway can also be inhibited. So why would that be the case? Well, in theory, cortisol has the ability to save lives, running away from a saber-toothed tiger, jumping out of a burning building. But those stresses are quite short-lived, whereas modern day stresses are much more chronic. So whilst you might not think that your inbox, or you running to get your kids to school in the morning, or the constant demands that are on us in 21st century living are really stressful, your body might have a differing opinion. And that might be one of the biggest reasons why your progesterone levels are dropping, because of this pregnenolone or cortisol steal. They both mean the same thing. We're stealing the raw materials to make our stress hormones. So if you're a woman and you're struggling with your fertility, understanding both your progesterone and your cortisol levels are vitally important. Outside of fertility, progesterone is like a zen hormone to our body. It has a nice relaxing impact. So not having enough of it, sabotaging that pathway, can really have an impact on our mental health and our relaxation skills. So understanding progesterone to estrogen is vital. Plus, as we approach perimenopause or into perimenopause, as we approach menopause, what often happens is that progesterone naturally drops, estrogen raises, and therefore the gap between the two is incredibly large. And that could be why your menstrual cycle has changed in length of time, so number of days, either becoming closer together or further apart. Your periods might have got heavier, more clotty. You might have had changes in your mood. You might have had changes in your breast density or more painful breasts. And all of this is sort of your body telling us that there's something going on with that estrogen to progesterone ratio. And whilst, of course, perimenopause into menopause is a very natural part of a woman's hormonal journey, if your progesterone has been stolen during your menstruating years, the gap may be much bigger in you, and therefore you might be shuttling more of this estrogen down the more aggressive pathways. Something so important for us to understand and support you with. And for each of these hormonal imbalances, we have interventions. The issue is it's finding the right imbalance to partner it with the right intervention. Now, finally, let's move on to our more male pattern hormones. So again, these can go either way. You might have a presentation of polycystic ovarian syndrome or more male pattern presentation, male pattern balding with thinning to the hair. You might have more acne or facial hair development. And that might be a sign that your androgen levels, particularly this one down here, androsterone, are too high. Again, we're able to find out exactly what those numbers look like. It might be, as well as being too high, your level of testosterone is too low. Again, go back to this concept of stealing those raw materials. Now, testosterone is so important for your sex drive, as well as for building muscle mass. How many people out there listening and going, yeah, my sex drive isn't as good as I want it to be. Maybe you're embarrassed to talk to somebody about it, but actually it might be as simple as supporting your testosterone synthesis, which is a little bit harder in us women because we don't have testes, which is a man's major supply of testosterone. So we need those raw materials much more to have that optimal level. So that's a bit of an overview of what you would see from your sex hormones. So now let's go down and talk about, first of all, our sleep hormone. Melatonin is a really important sleep hormone. It comes from a circadian rhythm, which is stimulated by our eyeballs. It goes dark outside, our eyeballs send a message to our pineal gland to say, it's dark outside, melatonin levels spike, and that supports the onset of sleep. Now, again, so many of us sabotage that, staring at blue lights, mobile phones, tablets, whacking on all the electric lights when it goes dark outside. It's normal behavior. But if you go back to our ancestors, they would have worked on the field until 3, 4 in the winter and 11 o'clock in the summer. They would have worked with their circadian rhythms. Now, melatonin doesn't just support our sleep. Melatonin is also a powerful antioxidant. It's a tumor surveillance agent. So knowing that your melatonin levels are optimal is a really important hormone, plus other benefits to our body. We then go down and look at your stress hormone. So we look at it through a few different lenses. First of all, we're looking over here at your metabolized cortisol, what's being metabolized from those adrenal glands. And then we're going down and looking at your circadian rhythm throughout the course of the day. So ideally, what we want to see is you wake in the morning and you have an increase in your cortisol within that first 30 minutes of greater than 50%. That's referred to as our cortisol awakening response. It gives you your get up and go. Then we start to decline through the morning into the afternoon, and our lowest cortisol should be before we go to bed at night. Now, we regularly see inverted patterns. Maybe you start super high, as if you've woken up to the sensation that a burglar's in your house, and your adrenaline levels are going through the roof, and then all of a sudden you come crashing back down. It might be that your adrenal response is being influenced by your blood sugar levels, and as your blood sugar crashes, maybe because your breakfast has been a bit high in refined carbohydrates, your cortisol tries to adapt to that response. So seeing what your cortisol is looking like through the course of the day is so important in relationship to how you are feeling. Maybe you've got a fatigue presentation, you're chronically fatigued, and I might look at your adrenal glands and they're flat as a pancake. That is something we commonly see, particularly in like post-viral fatigue. So again, if we're to support you to recreate an optimal circadian rhythm, we need to know where your starting point is. And it isn't just a single number, it's that rhythm through the course of the day. And finally, we're then going on to see a few key markers involved in hormonal and neurotransmitter balance. And that is some B vitamins, vitamin B12 and B6, really important for supporting optimal hormonal balance. We're also looking at biotin and glutathione. Glutathione being your body's major detoxification agent. If you're deficient in glutathione, you might not be able to clear your estrogen effectively, and therefore it's built up within the body. Not necessarily the healthiest presentation. We're able to look into one of your gut markers to see if there's any imbalance within the gut microbiome, something we refer to as dysbiosis. Think of it like optimal good bacteria versus not so good bacteria. What does your balance look like? We're then able to go on and look at your dopamine levels, and dopamine, as well as being important for lots of sort of memory, concentration, is also one of our neurotransmitters that's interplays with all of our happy hormones, our brain function. We then go on and look at your adrenaline levels. Now, this is more your quick fire stress response. If you suddenly, I make you jump and you're, whoa, Joe, it's adrenaline that makes you feel like your heart is beating through your chest. Maybe anxiety is part of your problem, and I can see that your adrenaline response is high. We need to work to calm that down. We also look at a neuroinflammatory marker. We're hearing much more about neuroinflammation nowadays. Neuroinflammation is a driver of Alzheimer's and dementias. So getting an early picture as to what's going on with that brain is a great way to work on recreating balance if necessary. And then finally, we get an insight into how much cell damage your body has been subjected to. Now, cell damage can occur by simply going outside and breathing in exhaust fumes, secondhand cigarette smoke, eating food sprayed with herbicides and pesticides. Now, our antioxidants, which come from that beautiful rainbow of color, which is available to us through our vegetables, our salads, our herbs, all help to dampen that oxidative or that cell damage that could be occurring in us. The problem occurs when we're coming into contact with lots of toxins. We're coming into contact with lots of sprayed foods, secondhand cigarette smoke, we're spending lots of time driving, filling up with diesel, and we haven't got enough antioxidants in our diet. And then that's when we get cell damage. Now, this is a movable marker. So if we were to find out you've got cell damage today, we would then work together to highlight where's it coming from, as well as really trying to populate your diet with antioxidants. Our food is such a big part of our medicine to be able to do that. So I hope this has been a useful insight into such a popular test. Why it's so popular, I'm sure you now agree, because it deep dive into your hormones, your sex hormones, your stress hormones, as well as this important page here, which gives us a really good overview of lots of other really useful markers. So If you have resonated with anything that I've said here today, you're feeling that your hormones are out of balance, you've been questioning why, and no doctor has been able to give you answers, then the Dutch test is for you. You can then work with one of our team to help you to interpret the results and for us to support you on that journey to come up with a plan of action about trying to recreate optimal balance. I hope that's been helpful. Take care.